Part 1, The Forbidden Descent, the map and the deal. The desert wind howled against the crumbling walls of the abandoned outpost, dragging sheets of sand across the floor like crawling snakes. Ethan Cole sat at the center of the table, his cigarette glowing in the dim lamplight, eyes fixed on the map spread before him. The paper was yellowed and fragile, edges burned as if it had been snatched from a fire. "This is it," he said, voice low, the words laced with greed. "The tomb of King Asham, no records, no grave robbers before us, untouched for centuries." Mara Briggs leaned over, her leather jacket creaking. She was all sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, and scars across her knuckles from fights she never lost. "And what about the stories? You heard what the guide said. Blood oath, cursed dead, the usual crap." Victor Hale scoffed, his grin flashing gold teeth. "I've been in 6 cursed tombs. The only curse is how much sand you get in your boots. We're not here for ghost stories. We're here for gold." Liam Frost sat apart from the group, cleaning his hunting knife. He wasn't grinning. He never did. "Just remember," he said quietly, "old kings didn't just bury their treasure, they buried the thieves." Ethan smirked. "That's why we're not thieves, Liam. We're collectors." They sealed the deal over cheap whiskey, unaware the sandstorm outside was already burying their footprints, the entrance. They reached the site at dawn after hours of trudging through endless dunes. The entrance was little more than a slit in the rock, half covered in sand and dry roots. Mara brushed it clear with her gloved hands, revealing carvings in the stone. Rows of headless figures kneeling before a towering crowned man, his hands dripping with what looked disturbingly like carved blood. Victor whistled. "Friendly welcome?" Liam's eyes narrowed. "That's a warning. Every headless figure? That's what happens to." "Anyone dumb enough to read too much into artwork," Ethan interrupted, swinging his pack around. He pulled out a heavy steel crowbar and jammed it into the stone seam. With a grunt, he pried it open. The rock shifted with a deep groan, as if the earth itself resented the intrusion. A rush of air hissed out, cold, impossibly cold for the desert, and with it came a stench that made Mara gag instantly. It was the smell of wet rot, of something that had been dead for centuries, but still somehow fresh. "Jesus Christ," she muttered, covering her nose. Victor grinned wider. "That's the smell of history." No one noticed the faint echo of footsteps deeper inside. The first chamber. The tunnel sloped steeply downward, the walls narrowing until their shoulders brushed the stone. Their headlamps lit the way, revealing more carvings, but these weren't of kings or ceremonies. They were of violence. Throats being slit, entrails being pulled out, skulls being crushed under stone. Mara stopped at one particularly vivid carving. A man with his eyes gouged out, mouth open in a scream while something long and thin snaked into it. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Victor snorted. "Ancient art was messed up. Let's keep moving." The air grew colder. Frost began to form on their breath. In a tomb buried under burning desert sands, they emerged into the first chamber, their lights revealing 4 massive sarcophagi, each carved from black stone veined with red. Gold offerings littered the floor. Goblets, coins, necklaces. Some were half buried in thick, dark sand. Ethan's eyes widened. "We're rich." Liam stayed by the entrance. "We take this slow. No rushing, no touching." Victor ignored him. He stepped toward the nearest sarcophagus, running his fingers over the strange symbols etched into it. "This one's mine." With a grunt, he wedged his crowbar under the heavy stone lid and heaved. The first death. The lid came free with a grinding shriek, toppling to the floor and cracking in two. Inside lay a perfectly preserved corpse. Skin stretched tight over bones, mouth sewn shut with what looked like blackened sinew. The body's hands were crossed over its chest, clutching a dagger whose blade shimmered wetly in the lamplight. Victor laughed. "Look at this. The blade's still." His words cut off in a wet, choking sound. His head jerked violently to the side. Then his entire head ripped free from his shoulders in a spray of blood so hot it steamed in the cold air. It flew across the chamber, bouncing once before rolling to a stop against the far wall. Eyes still blinking in shock, his body remained standing for a heartbeat longer, spurting crimson in rhythmic bursts that painted the black stone floor. Then it collapsed with a heavy thud, blood pooling rapidly beneath it. Mara screamed and stumbled back. Liam was already raising his knife, eyes darting around the shadows. Ethan's voice was a harsh whisper. What the fuck just happened? The corpse inside the sarcophagus hadn't moved, but the black sinew stitching its mouth was now dripping. The whispers. They didn't bury Victor. There was no point. His body was just another part of the tomb now. They pressed deeper, Ethan still clutching the map as if it could protect him. The corridors twisted unnaturally, branching into dead ends that hadn't been on the parchment. Every turn brought more carvings and more frost. Their boots crunched on ice, not sand. Then came the whispers. At first it was just a faint hiss behind them, but soon words began to take shape, not in English but in something older, harsher. Yet somehow they understood. One gone, three remain. Mara's breathing quickened. It's counting us. The sound of footsteps followed them, slow, deliberate, echoing just far enough behind that they could never quite catch a glimpse of the source. The Hall of Kneeling Men. They entered a long hall lined with statues of kneeling men, each carved with such detail that every wrinkle, scar, and pore seemed real. All were headless, their necks ending in jagged stone stumps. Liam froze halfway down the hall. These weren't carved. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Liam stepped closer to one statue and scraped at the stone with his knife. A thin layer of dust fell away, revealing skin beneath. Dry, gray, human. They're not statues, Liam said, his voice low. They're bodies, turned to stone. Before they could react, a deafening crack echoed through the hall. The headless figure nearest Mara shifted slightly, its hand twitching. Then they all began to move. The chase. The kneeling bodies rose in jerky, unnatural motions, their stumps tilting as if sniffing the air. Their movements grew faster, more fluid, as they closed in. Run, Liam barked. They sprinted, the sound of pounding feet and scraping stone behind them. Mara screamed as a cold hand brushed her shoulder, leaving a smear of blood that wasn't hers. Ethan's map flew from his grasp, sucked backward into the mass of headless hunters. They burst into another chamber, slamming the heavy stone door behind them. The pounding began immediately, slow at first, then frenzied, as if the things outside could smell their hearts. Mara was shaking uncontrollably. Victor's dead. Those things are moving. We need to get out now. Ethan shook his head, wild-eyed. Not without the treasure. The deeper descent. They followed a spiral stairwell that plunged into darkness. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices that dripped with mockery. Two more, then you? The stairs ended at a massive bronze door engraved with the image of a crowned man sitting on a throne of skulls. His eyes were empty sockets, but deep inside them, something glimmered wetly. Ethan pushed the door open, and they stepped into a chamber so large their lights couldn't find the far walls. The floor was covered in gold, gems, and artifacts piled high, and in the center, a single black throne. Upon it sat a figure wrapped in decaying cloth, a crown fused to its skull. Its eye sockets dripped fresh blood. The head tilted toward them, and the chamber doors slammed shut. Part 2. The Curse Awakens. The Blood Crown. The chamber stank of wet metal and rotting skin. Ethan's beam swept across heaps of treasure, but every gold coin glistened as if damp, catching the light in a way that was almost red. The figure on the black throne didn't move at first. It sat slouched, its skeletal hands resting on the armrests, long black nails hooked like talons. The crown was fused into its skull with clotted streaks of something that wasn't rust. Then, without a sound, its head tilted. The jaw cracked open slowly, revealing black gums and teeth that looked filed to points. From deep within its throat came the sound of dripping water, except Ethan realized it was thicker. Blood. A single drop fell to the floor, steaming on impact. The smell hit them instantly, rich, metallic, and suffocating. Mara whispered, "Ethan, we shouldn't be here." The figure's hand twitched. Victor's return. From behind the throne, something stumbled into the light. For a moment, Mara thought it was another corpse. Then her stomach dropped. It was Victor, or what was left of him. His head, the one they'd seen ripped off, was crudely sewn back onto his neck with thick black sinew. His eyes were milky white, but they still tracked their movement. His mouth hung half open, and when he breathed, it sounded wet, as if his lungs were full of liquid. Victor's body jerked unnaturally as he stepped forward, a long, that curved blade in his hand. Blood dripped from the tip, but it wasn't his own. "Victor?" Ethan said weakly. Victor's jaw moved, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was deeper, older. "You take, you give." He lunged. The first strike, Liam reacted first, shoving Mara aside as the blade whistled through the air. It missed her throat by an inch, slicing a thick strand of her hair. Ethan grabbed a gold goblet from the pile and hurled it at Victor's head. The goblet hit with a dull clang and stuck. It didn't bounce off. Instead, it sank into his skull as if the bone were soft clay. Victor didn't even flinch. He kept moving forward, his milky eyes locked on Ethan. The throne creaked behind them. The crowned corpse was rising to its feet. The seal of blood, Mara grabbed Ethan by the arm and pulled him toward an archway on the side of the chamber. "Move!" They sprinted through, the sound of Victor's dragging footsteps echoing behind them. The corridor narrowed, opening into a smaller room lit by flickering blue torches. On the far wall, carved deep into the black stone, were runes that pulsed faintly. In the center was a shallow bowl carved from the wall itself, filled with a thick, dark liquid that reeked of iron. Liam's voice was sharp. "This is a blood seal. They're not just guarding treasure, they're feeding it." Ethan looked around, panic in his eyes. "Feeding what?" The ground shuddered in answer. Liam's end. The tremor split the floor, and from the crack, a thin black tendril snaked upward. Before Liam could move, it lashed around his ankle and yanked him down. His knife clattered away as he fell, screaming. The tendril tightened, slicing through his boot and skin in one motion. Blood spurted, coating the floor. More tendrils burst from the crack, wrapping around his legs, waist, arms, pulling him inch by inch toward the fissure. Mara and Ethan grabbed his arms, trying to pull him back, but the tendrils were stronger. The skin on his legs began to split under the pressure, long red gashes opening to reveal bone. "Cut them!" Liam screamed, his voice breaking. Ethan reached for the knife, but before he could grab it, one tendril shot up, punched clean through Liam's mouth and out the back of his skull. The force lifted him off the ground. His body twitched violently, eyes rolling back as blood poured down his face. Then the tendrils yanked him into the crack. The stone sealed shut as if it had never been there. The hall of runes, only Ethan and Mara remained. Their breaths were ragged, the air colder now, frosting the edges of their hair. The blue torches flared suddenly, casting shadows that seemed to writhe across the walls. The runes shifted again, rearranging themselves into jagged English letters. 2 remain. 1 must serve. Mara stepped back. No, I'm not doing this. From the corridor behind them came the sound of metal dragging across stone. Slow, steady, unhurried. Victor was coming. The guardian. Victor appeared in the doorway, his body hunched, the curved blade scraping the floor. Behind him, the crowned corpse entered, each step leaving a wet print on the stone. The king's mouth opened wide, far wider than human anatomy allowed. His jaw split to the ears, the skin tearing with a sickening sound. Black fluid poured from the gap, splashing onto the floor, and where it touched, the stone sizzled. Ethan raised a shaking hand toward the treasure in the main chamber. "Take it. Just take it and let us go." The king tilted his head. "Not gold. Blood." Victor surged forward. Mara's sacrifice. Ethan and Mara turned to run, but the corridor was a dead end. They were trapped. Mara's eyes darted between Victor and Ethan, her breathing fast. Then, without warning, she shoved Ethan backward. He stumbled, hitting the wall hard. "What the fuck?" Ethan shouted. Her voice was cold. "If one has to serve, it's not going to be me." Before Ethan could react, she grabbed a gold dagger from the floor and slashed it across his thigh. Blood sprayed, hot and vivid. The king inhaled sharply, the sound like 1,000 snakes hissing at once. Victor lunged for Ethan, blade raised. Ethan screamed as the curved steel plunged into his chest, sliding between ribs. He coughed blood, choking as Victor twisted the blade. The king stepped closer, tendrils unfurling from his mouth. They wrapped around Ethan's body, lifting him into the air. His skin began to split from the inside as if something were trying to crawl out. The new guardian, Ethan's scream became a wet gurgle as his jaw dislocated, his eyes bursting in sprays of blood. His skin peeled away in strips, revealing black sinew beneath. The tendrils retracted, dropping what remained of his flesh to the floor. What stood in his place was taller, broader, its face hidden beneath a mask of human skin. The king stepped back to the throne. Victor moved to stand at his side, and the new figure, wearing Ethan's skin, turned its head toward Mara. She ran, but the doorways shifted before her eyes, the corridors twisting into a maze. Every turn brought her back to the throne room, where two guardians now stood in silent watch. The seal closes. The king sat, tendrils retracting fully. The blue torches dimmed until the room was swallowed in darkness. Somewhere far above in the desert, the sand began to shift, burying the entrance once more. In the dark, the whispers began again. One remains, for now. Part 3. The Final Offering. Mara ran until her legs burned, her boots slipping on frost-slick stone. Every turn she took bled into another, the same corridor, the same flickering blue torches, the same carvings of headless men on the walls. Her heartbeat was a drum in her ears. Her knife, Victor's old hunting blade, was slippery in her hand, the hilt slick with her own sweat. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Nothing, no footsteps, no dragging blade. And yet, she could feel them, watching, waiting. Somewhere in the dark, a whisper slithered through the air. One remains. The treasure room again. She burst through an archway and froze. It was the treasure chamber. Again. The black throne sat at the center, the crowned corpse slouched upon it, head tilted as if amused. To its left stood Victor, his sewn-on head leaking a thin line of blood down his neck. To its right stood Ethan, or what had once been Ethan. His skin mask grinned, teeth far too many for a human mouth. Backed away, knife trembling in her grip. "Stay the fuck away from me." The king's voice was low, ancient, and hungry. "You opened the gate. You took what was ours. Now you pay." The blood floor. The ground beneath her feet shifted. At first, it was just a slickness, like stepping in water. Then she looked down, and her stomach lurched. The floor was bleeding. Thick, dark red liquid seeped up between the stones, like running in rivulets that snaked toward the throne. Each drop that touched the base of the throne was absorbed instantly, the black stone pulsing faintly as if it had a heartbeat. The air grew heavy. The smell of iron filled her lungs until she gagged. Victor stepped forward, dragging his curved blade along the floor. The sound was like a scream drawn out on metal. The first cut. He moved faster than she thought possible. One moment he was shuffling forward, the next the blade was whistling toward her neck. She ducked, but not fast enough. The steel kissed her cheek, opening it from jaw to ear. Hot blood ran down her neck. The sting was immediate, sharp, electric. Ethan moved next, tendrils of black sinew lashing out from beneath his skin mask. One caught her wrist. The pain was searing, like molten wire wrapped around bone. Mara screamed, twisting violently, and the sinew tore through flesh, ripping skin from her forearm in a long, wet strip. Her vision swam, but she didn't stop moving. She kicked Ethan square in the chest. His body barely moved, but the tendril loosened just enough for her to wrench free. The statue hall she bolted through a side passage, desperate for escape. It led her into the hall of kneeling statues again, the headless, skin-turned stone guardians. They began to stir the moment she entered. Stone scraped on stone, the sound like teeth grinding. Blood began to seep from the jagged stumps of their necks, running down their chests in thick streams. One reached for her, its fingers breaking off as they closed around her arm, but the grip was still strong enough to yank her off her feet. She slashed wildly with her knife. The blade bit deep into its wrist, and instead of stone dust, a gout of wet blood sprayed her face. She tore free and ran, the statues lumbering after her in perfect, silent coordination. The chamber of the seal. Her mad flight ended in a smaller chamber she didn't recognize. In the center was a stone altar, its surface carved with deep channels that formed a pattern she couldn't quite make out. The channels were filled with blood. Hanging above the altar was a massive iron hook suspended from the ceiling by a chain. It swayed slowly, creaking as if moved by an invisible hand. The runes on the wall shifted, spelling words in jagged English. "Give blood." "Be free." Her chest heaved. She looked at her arm, still bleeding from where Ethan's tendril had flayed it. Her stomach twisted. "How much blood?" she whispered. The altar's channels pulsed in response. The trap. She stepped toward the altar and froze. Behind her, the chain rattled. She turned just in time to see Victor step into the room. His curved blade gleamed wet in the dim light. Behind him came Ethan, silent, tendrils shifting like snakes around his feet. The king entered last, stooping to pass through the archway. His crown scraped the stone above, leaving streaks of fresh blood on the ceiling. The whisper came again, louder now, vibrating in her skull. One must serve. The offering Mara's mind raced. They wanted blood. Enough to fill the altar's channels, enough to seal the gate, enough to keep her from joining Victor and Ethan. Her eyes darted to the hook. Before Victor could move, she grabbed the chain and yanked with all her strength. The hook swung down in a vicious arc, catching him in the side of the neck. The sound was sickening, steel punching through meat and bone. His head half detached instantly, flopping against his shoulder as blood sprayed in thick hot jets. The force knocked him sideways onto the altar, his body twitching. The blood poured into the channels. Ethan's tendrils lashed out, but she dove aside, rolling across the slick floor. She came up on one knee, knife ready, but Ethan didn't advance. He was watching the altar. The blood in the channels began to glow faintly, the pattern on the altar resolving into the shape of an open eye. The air shifted, warmer now, almost breathable. The betrayal. The king stepped forward, his shadow falling over the altar. He placed one skeletal hand on Victor's half-severed head and pushed it down until it tore free from the neck entirely. The head rolled into the blood, submerging completely. The glow intensified. Mara took a step back toward the archway. "That's it. You've got your blood. I'm leaving." The king's head turned slowly toward her. His jaw opened again, wider than before. Not enough. Ethan moved, the final struggle. He was on her before she could react, tendrils wrapping around her legs and yanking her to the floor. Her knife clattered away. She kicked wildly, catching him in the ribs, but he didn't flinch. The tendrils climbed higher, wrapping around her torso, squeezing until her ribs creaked. She gasped for breath, spots dancing in her vision. In desperation, she reached down, grabbed one of the sinews, and bit down hard. It was like biting into raw muscle soaked in hot tar. Black fluid filled her mouth. She gagged, but the tendril recoiled enough for her to grab her knife and plunge it into Ethan's neck. The blade slid in up to the hilt. He didn't scream, but the tendrils went wild, slamming her into the wall. Her skull cracked against the stone, and white light exploded behind her eyes. She hit the floor hard, the knife still in her grip. The last cut, Ethan staggered toward her, his mask of skin slipping to reveal a black, eyeless face beneath. Mara crawled backward until she felt the altar against her spine. She looked at the hook, now dripping with Victor's blood, and made a choice. As Ethan lunged, she sidestepped, grabbed the chain again, and swung the hook straight into his skull. The point punched through his head with a wet crunch, lifting him off his feet. Blood and black fluid poured down the chain, splattering the altar. The glow turned blinding. The air vibrated. The price smell. The king stepped forward, towering over her. "You have given much blood," he said, voice deep enough to rattle her bones. "Enough to close the gate." She staggered toward the archway. "Then I'm free?" The king tilted his head. "No." The walls began to close in, the archway shrinking until there was nothing but black stone. The treasure melted into blood, running toward the throne in streams. The king lowered himself onto the seat, gesturing toward the space beside him. One must serve. The new queen tendrils shot from the throne, wrapping around her arms and legs. She screamed as they pierced her skin, burrowing inside, filling her veins with fire. Her vision blurred. Her heart stopped, then started again, slower, heavier. The tendrils pulled her onto a smaller throne that rose from the floor beside the king's. Her skin paled, her eyes clouded white, her breath turned into mist. The knife fell from her grip, clattering onto the black stone and sinking as if into water. When the transformation was done, she sat still, her body motionless, but her eyes, lifeless and fixed on the entrance that no longer existed. The tomb sleeps far above. The desert winds buried the last trace of the tomb's entrance beneath shifting sands. The throne room sat silent again. The king, his two guardians, Victor and Ethan, and the new queen Mara, her cold white eyes waiting. In the dark, the whispers began again. One must serve. 4 now wait. And somewhere far away, greedy hands unrolled an old burnt map. The curse was ready. The end.